Right guys, what have we got here? We've got a bone stock blacktop ZETEC. We run it on injection, we run it on one carburetor, we run it on twin carburetors, we run it on a standard intake manifold. Want to know what it produces? Watch this space. Right guys, what have we got here? We've got something a lot of you waited for. We've got ZETEC on the dyno. And I'm going to call it a scrapyard ZETEC because basically I took it out of a car that I sent to the scrapyard. So there we go. This is a bone stock 2-litre blacktop. It had done about 130,000 miles in a car, albeit it had one elderly gentleman as an owner, so I don't think it had a hard life. Let's say it's absolutely bone stock, complete down to standard full plastic intake manifold. We do have a racy looking 4x1 exhaust. I don't know what it is. From the shape of it, it's probably an oval racing manifold. We have no ancillaries on the front, partly because I'm doing this on a budget like I always have, so I have no means to power the water pump without changing the reverse impeller or extra pulleys and stuff, so we just junked everything off the front and I'm running it with a Craig Davies electric water pump. So what did this engine make? Well, full quoted this engine is 130 horsepower, so I'd be curious to see what it does. Typically, if we've got a healthy engine, a healthy stock engine, because on the dyno we're not running the original air boxes, we're not running catalytic converters, there's factory exhaust, and we're running power friendly air fuel ratios, typically a standard engine will make a bit more than standard power. Yeah, standard power is 130 horsepower. But actually I've already run this today. I got it warmed up earlier and I've done one full power pull. Air fuel ratios all over the place, but it made some numbers. In fact, let's show you what it made. Right, gotta say I'm fairly impressed with this already. Let's say rated at Ford 130 horsepower, well actually made 143. And a fairly flat torque curve. There's a big dip in it here, but that's because at that point the air fuel ratio has gone seriously lean. Bear in mind, this is on stock injectors, stock intake manifold, and the map in the ECU, it's not been mapped for this. I just chucked some numbers in to make it run. And the thing that really surprises me here is that, yes, the power's dipped there, but that's nearly 20-to-1 air fuel ratio. And it actually pulled through it, and it made some power there. Most of the old engines I run they just flame out trying to run at 20-to-1 air fuel ratio. Even at peak, we're leaner than 14-to-1. So, you know, we're catalytic converter friendly exhaust emissions here. So, air fuel ratio rather. So, I suspect if we do a few more runs and I can trim the map a bit and get a bit more fuel in it, it will make more power. There is a phrase, lean is mean. Well, to be honest, that's not really true. Too rich will hurt power, but lean does not help power. The engine wants what it wants, and it wants the correct air fuel ratio that it likes. But running it lean just heats things up, and it certainly, I'd say looking at this, there's more power here. So, all is, what's next? Well, let's, I've already, based on this, had a bit of a guesstimate of some better numbers in the map, so we're going to warm it up, and I'm going to do another couple of pulls with it in its standard trim and see if we can beat our 143 horsepower. Right, so here we are, before and after all those dyno runs. So, who was it said lean is mean? Because it ain't. Well, not unless it's so lean it melts your engine, right? Beginning of the video, I said I'd run it on a map that was lean. And there in yellow is the lean map. So I was impressed, 142 horsepower, right. And there it was. Now, with fuel, look where we are now. 159 horsepower and 155 pound-foot torque. And particularly there, where it was really lean, causing that spike, look at the uplift. So, yeah, I'm pretty impressed with this for what is internally a bone stock engine. Right, so far this little engine's impressed me. But not many people can transplant one of these into their Escort or Ford Pop or whatever it is and keep this plastic monstrosity of a manifold. Doesn't look great, but I think it's largely responsible for a lot of the torque. So what I thought I'd do is try the budget friendly version first, and Ike, as in Ike Engineering, has lent me one of his 3236 intake manifolds. So we're going to pop this on there and see what we've got. Now I'm told these will do 160 horsepower on a 3236. Will this one? I'm not sure it will, to be honest, because from what I've heard, if you're going to get 160 horsepower out of these on the 3236, they need more compression, they need the block decking, and obviously this is internally standard, but you don't know. I didn't think it was going to make 159 horsepower, so it might. Right, I guess you might all be wondering what I was going to do ignition wise, because obviously the injection and the DTA did injection and fueling. But obviously for the carburetor setup, we don't need injection, but we still need sparks. So what I decided was the fairest thing in the test to do was to use the DTA to do ignition only. So we didn't change any of these settings in terms of ignition. So the ignition map is exactly the same. So therefore we've only changed one thing. We've changed from injection to the carburetor manifold. So the timing is exactly the same for both setups. I mean, it's possible that the carburetor setup might benefit from slightly more timing some points in the rev range, but to be honest, I doubt it will make much difference because this engine is not sensitive to timing at all. For the most part, we've got low 20 degrees advance in the map, and that's all it wants. So, and we're only running with a peak of 26. So I don't think there's anything to be had with timing, but let's say if we got the same ignition timing for carb and injection, then we know any power difference is only in the induction type. Right guys, here we go. 32, 36 on the Ike manifold in blue, and in red and pinkish red, whatever that is the original Ford intake manifold. And as you can see, 158 horsepower from the 32, 36. You know, it peaks later in the rev range, but there's not much in it there. overall, the torque curve of the plastic manifold is generally better, but then that's because the manifold for the 3236 is a little short thing, whereas the plastic manifold has got really long runners, and really long runners tend to produce a longer, flatter torque curve. I mean, everyone talks about intake length, you know, long's good for bottom end power and short's good for high end power, and then they start applying it to ram pipes and DCOEs. Well, to be honest, whatever length ram pipe you put in your DCOE, unless it's 3 foot long, makes for a short intake manifold. These original manufacturer intakes are incredibly long. But we're really pleased with this. I'm surprised. You know, before I started, you know, I'd heard from various sources that these will do 160 or just over on a 3236. As a rule, generally they need a bit of tweaking, touch of advance on the inlet cam to do it, but 158 horsepower, we're blooming close. And I think a 3236 on a bone stock blacktop with just an exhaust manifold, yeah, that's banging. That's Hi guys, right, where are we? Well, the IDFs are now on our ZETEC. What will they do? How will they compare to the 3236? Will they make more power? Will they make another 10, 20, 30 horsepower? My guess is, at this stage, 8. That's my guess. And doesn't sound a big gain, but bear in mind, we've got a stock engine here. So, you know, it was already doing 158 horsepower on the 3236. So I don't think the IDFs are going to add a great deal, but you never know. So what are these IDFs? Well, they're a set of FAJSs from Mike Engineering. I don't know if this is a pre-production set or whether they're ready to available to buy off the shelf. If you want to know more about them, you're going to have to contact Ike. And just for disclosure purposes, I know Ike. Sometimes I buy things off him. Sometimes he lends me stuff. Occasionally I test an engine for something for him. It's the same relationship I have with Ike I do with Burton's and even John at Bestech. So there's a bit of mutual trading. I'm not being paid to do this test. I'm just doing this test out of interest, and Ike was good enough to lend me some carbs. So with that out of the way, let's go on. Let's make some. Right guys, here we are. I've left the original full plastic manifold and the 3236 on the screen. I've now overlaid in green the IDFs. Now the elephant in the room with the IDFs is all the fuel standoff everywhere, which, let's face it, is kind of something the carburetors like to do. It's possible that some smaller chokes in those IDFs might have tamed that, or some longer ram pipes. Probably longer ram pipes, but more of that later. So, yeah, I mean, their IDFs basically their IDFs were 10 horsepower up on a 3236. The IDFs weren't quite as consistent run to run as everything else has been so far, which is probably why this graph shows that little peak there. That's probably not real, that little peak. But, you know, engines don't repeat exactly, especially things that are living and breathing and puking fuel out into the atmosphere. So what can we say about the IDFs in comparison with, well, either? Most power by some way. From 4,000 onwards, they out-torqued the 3236 as you'd suggest. Down at the bottom, there's no real difference, which there wouldn't be, because the 3236 down there is not restricting the engine's air delivery. Yes, the plastic manifold's up here, but then that's massive intake length, which is picking the torque up. So, you know, if you can do something about the fuel standoff and contain that, the IDFs have got to be a good option. Well, I say a good option. we need an ECU to control the ignition. So I'm inclined to say we're almost better off on injection. But if you want a classic car look and you're prepared to put some work into carburetors, certainly some pair of twin carbs, whether the downdraft or side draft, can certainly do the business. And, you know, we are now knocking the door of 170 horsepower from our stock engine. So, well up. Right, guys, what we got here? Well, you've been watching. I hope you've been watching. You're watching now anyway. You've seen that the IDFs have been making quite a lot of standoff. Whether it's because you can see it more on the IDF manifolds than you can DCOEs, but I think to a certain extent, I think the shape of the manifold tends to either make it more apparent or make it worse. I think it makes it worse. But anyway, one way we can sometimes cure standoff is a change of intake length. But I didn't have many choices. We had those that were fitted, or the only other thing I could find that would give us longer are these emerald adjustable ones. But because these tubes won't slide down into the carburetor, we're stuck at full length. So dramatic difference in intake length there. That's going to do a few things. It will probably cure the standoff, and it's probably going to send the air-fuel ratio off the chart in one direction or the other. But let's get some, let's get it running and see what these do. Right, so here we are in yellow with the really long trumpets and the much reduced fuel standoff. And the longer trumpets have kind of done what I expect they do. They've picked up the torque low down and they've robbed us a bit of top end power. It's only about 4 horsepower, so it's not dramatic. And I suspect we might have been out, if we'd had them available, if we'd have found a ram pipe length somewhere in between the two extremes that we ran, we'd probably near enough match curve for curve and not have the big standoff of the first set of ram pipes. Interesting aside though. So, back to testing. So, last up, mounted on a dead straight Gen V intake manifold, are a set of 48mm throttle bodies. Curiously, the induction length from head face to in the ram pipe is almost identical to the IDF carburetors. So if we see a change in power, it's not majorly going to be length. Ram pipes are slightly different design, so the ram pipe design can skew it. But the big difference, obviously, we've got a dead straight inlet track, so I would expect these to make a bit more power. As before, as the other tests, the ignition timing is fixed. It's the same. It's been the same all the tests. It's still the same for this one. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to run it up, map the fuel inside of things to get the air-fuel ratio in the window. We're going to give it a pull and see what we get. Right, here we go. 44 IDFs with the shorter trumpets, so the format that made them more power, up against the 48mm Gen Vs. Down the bottom, nothing really in it. Through a bit here, the carburetors actually went out, and at the top, the injection comes on strong and rumps on to make something like, made 177, 178 horsepower. So the injection was real strong at the top. So what could we explain why? Well, I think the real top end is the fact that the injection intake was straight and air doesn't like going around corners. The engine clearly wasn't too bothered about it down there. Why was the carburetor better there? Well, that could be reflected sound waves, induction pulses, or it may just be the way a carburetor works. It atomizes the fuel And the way it atomizes the fuel means it has a charge cooling effect. So it makes the air going into the engine more dense. So it could be, that's why the carburetor wins out there. But at the top of the rev range, the straightness and the less flow restriction of the straight intake wins out. We're never going to truly know. You're going to pay your money and take your choices. But what I'll do now is I'll just stick the 32, 36 back on there. So you can get an idea, once again, of how that compared. Right, there we go. I've put the 32, 36 on there now. I still think that holds up well. At the end, I'll leave a table where it will show all the different combinations I ran and the different power numbers. But I think this engine's banging. Not only in the way it made the power and what we've achieved, the fact that Ford absolutely nailed this engine. They got it right. Because it's pretty much bomb-proof. Now, as someone that mends cars and engines every day for normal work, we very rarely have ever had to fix a blacktop. We've had to repair far more Duratex, unload more Vauxhalls, including the fabled XE. So I think Ford absolutely nailed this, and the biggest bang for the buck here has got to be like 32, 36. And on that bombshell, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, I'll bring some more. Catch you on the flip side, guys.